The morning sunlight filtered softly through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the penthouse, casting golden patterns across the ivory sheets of the oversized bed. Emma Hastings stirred, her long lashes fluttering open as she instinctively reached out to the other side of the mattress. Her hand landed on emptiness, cold, smooth sheets untouched by warmth. Her breath caught in her throat, but she didn't flinch. She had stopped being surprised a long time ago. The silence in the room was deafening, broken only by the distant hum of traffic below. Daniel wasn't home. Again. Emma sat up slowly, one hand supporting her lower back, the other resting protectively over her growing belly. At 5 months pregnant, she carried a radiant glow, but it was dimmed by the shadows in her eyes. The baby inside her kicked gently, a reminder that she was never truly alone, yet emotionally, she had never felt more isolated. The man she had once built a life with, the man who once traced her dreams into the stars with promises of forever, had become a stranger in a $1,000 suit. She slid her legs over the edge of the bed and stood, her silk robe brushing against her calves as she moved toward the living room. The penthouse, sleek and immaculate, seemed to mock her with its emptiness. She passed by framed photographs of happier times, smiling vacations, champagne toasts, awards and anniversaries, ghosts of a life that had slowly unraveled with every late meeting, every unanswered call, every perfume-scented shirt he thought she wouldn't notice. Emma paused at the fireplace mantel where one particular photo stared back, their wedding day, Daniel kissing her temple as she laughed. She turned the frame down. Then her gaze drifted to the marble-top kitchen counter, where a thick cream-colored folder rested. Her fingers trembled slightly as she reached for it, but her expression was resolute. Inside were the divorce papers, drawn up by her lawyer 2 weeks ago, and signed, until now. She had rehearsed this moment 1,000 times, waiting for the last flicker of hope to die. Last night had been the final nail. The headlines had already hit her phone. Billionaire Daniel Hastings spotted with Vanessa Langford again. Same woman. Same betrayal. Emma clutched the folder to her chest, turned toward the front door, and waited, not for his explanation, but for her freedom. It had all begun in the polished corridors of Harvard Law School, where futures were forged and reputations were born. Emma Bennett was known then as the woman to watch, sharp-witted, fiercely disciplined, and always seated in the front row. Professors praised her not just for her intelligence but for her unrelenting drive. Daniel Hastings, on the other hand, was a different force entirely. He exuded charm with every smile, walked into every room as though he owned it, and had a silver tongue that could bend any argument in his favor. Their paths crossed during a heated debate in contract law, where Emma challenged him head-on, and won. Daniel had laughed afterward, genuinely impressed, and offered to buy her coffee. She turned him down. The next day, he tried again. And again. Persistence wore down resistance, and soon their names were set in tandem, Emma and Daniel, the power duo of their class. They married just after graduation, a quiet ceremony overlooking the cliffs of Martha's Vineyard. It was impulsive and romantic, the kind of decision that made sense only when you were 25 and madly in love. With matching ambition and a shared vision, they co-founded Hastings Enterprises, a boutique law and investment firm that would later evolve into a sprawling corporate empire. Emma handled legal structuring and negotiations. Daniel focused on mergers and media. They built it all from the ground up, late nights in a cramped office, shared takeout on conference tables, whispered dreams over cheap wine. In those early years, he was tender and attentive, the kind of man who left notes in her briefcase and held her hand during boardroom battles. She believed they were unbreakable. But power has a way of changing people. As Hastings Enterprises grew, so did Daniel's hunger for status and control. The gentle husband who once danced with her in the kitchen became a cold strategist obsessed with domination. He started missing dinners, forgetting anniversaries, replacing conversations with conference calls. Emma tried to keep up, tried to hold on to the man she once knew. But the harder she clung, the faster he slipped away. The warmth in his eyes dulled, replaced by calculation. Their late-night talks about dreams became discussions about quarterly earnings. And slowly, her world began to shrink. They tried for children. Eva the planner, mapped out everything: fertility windows, supplements, specialist visits. She suffered 2 miscarriages in silence, refusing to let grief derail their goals. Daniel wasn't heartless, but he was distant. Each time she broke down in the bathroom with blood on her hands and sobs in her throat, he would show up an hour later with flowers and apologies, but never stayed long enough to really see the damage. She stopped telling him how she felt. He stopped asking. The company's board celebrated expansion into tech, and Emma celebrated her sorrow behind closed doors. It was only after stepping away from the firm for health reasons that Emma discovered she was pregnant again. This time, she didn't tell Daniel right away. She wanted to protect the small, fragile spark inside her without attaching it to the man who now came home in silence and cologne not her own. When she finally shared the news, Daniel had smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. He said all the right things, promised more time, fewer trips, a new start. But days turned into weeks, and nothing changed. He remained a ghost in tailored suits. Emma, though radiant in her second trimester, found herself walking through the penthouse alone, speaking to a child who would know her love but might never understand what a real family looked like. So here she stood now, alone but pregnant, in a house built on ambition and crumbling under betrayal. The man who once saw the world in her eyes now saw her as an obligation. The empire they built was still standing, but the marriage that made it possible was already ash in memory. Vanessa Langford was the kind of woman who never entered a room unnoticed. At 29, she had mastered the art of silent dominance. Her walk was calculated elegance, her voice always low but laced with provocation, and her signature red lips could command an entire room without a single word. A former runway model who once graced the covers of Italian Vogue and walked for Valentino, Vanessa had transitioned into a new role that suited her ambitions better: luxury fashion brand ambassador and full-time socialite. But behind the designer gowns and sponsored campaigns, Vanessa had a singular, razor-sharp focus: elevation. And Daniel Hastings was her next rung on the golden ladder. The tabloids had given her a nickname long before Emma ever knew her name: the Billionaire's Flame. The first grainy paparazzi photo had shown her and Daniel at an art gala, laughing a little too closely over champagne. The second, a week later, caught them walking out of the back of a Bentley at midnight. Daniel had brushed it off as business. Emma, wanting to believe him, accepted the explanation. But the photos didn't stop. Every few weeks, a new image surfaced: Vanessa in the VIP section at his events, Vanessa boarding his jet, Vanessa wearing a watch Emma had given him for their anniversary. Then came the breaking point. It was 11:13 p.m. when Emma's phone vibrated against her nightstand. She had been reading a pregnancy blog about sleep positions when the headline lit up her screen: exclusive, billionaire Daniel Hastings spotted leaving hotel with mystery woman. Her blood ran cold as she tapped the article. There he was, Daniel, exiting the lobby of the Grand Regent Hotel at nearly midnight, tie loose, jaw clenched, followed closely by Vanessa in a silk dress slit nearly to the hip, her signature red lips curled in triumph. The article speculated it was a late business meeting. The photos told a different story. Emma stared at the screen for a long time, her heart thudding so hard it hurt. There was no mistaking the intimacy in the way Vanessa had looked up at Daniel, no denying the smug satisfaction on her face. She wasn't just a fling, she was a threat. Vanessa had made her intentions clear through every public display and whispered rumor: she didn't want to be the other woman. She wanted the title, the house, the empire. She wanted Emma erased. And the worst part? Daniel wasn't fighting it. Vanessa, for all her beauty, wasn't stupid. She knew exactly what she was doing. She had learned early on that in elite circles, love was currency, and betrayal was strategy. She used both as weapons. Daniel, distracted by her flattery and thrilled by her ambition, had walked right into her trap. And Emma, standing barefoot in their home, one hand on her belly and the other gripping the phone, realized with final clarity that this wasn't a phase. This was a war. And Vanessa Langford had just fired the first shot. The door opened with a quiet click at exactly 3:02 a.m. Daniel stepped into the penthouse with the same casual confidence he wore like a second skin, but tonight it faltered. The silence of the space greeted him like a wall of ice, thicker than usual. He shrugged off his coat, ran a hand through his tousled hair, and loosened his collar as he walked into the dimly lit kitchen, expecting, as always, for the night to swallow his sins without consequence. But she was there. Emma sat at the marble kitchen island, bathed in the soft glow of a single overhead light. Her face was unreadable, her spine straight, and in front of her lay a folder. Not just any folder, the folder. She didn't speak, not right away. She just looked at him, and for the first time in years, Daniel felt small. He hesitated at the doorway, the scent of unfamiliar perfume still clinging to his shirt like evidence. It mixed with the faint smell of Emma's lavender tea, still warm beside her. The contrast stung. He cleared his throat. "You're up." Emma didn't flinch. "Hard to sleep when your husband's out until 3 a.m., she said evenly, her voice sharp without raising an octave. Her fingers brushed over the edge of the divorce papers, steady and controlled. Especially when the whole world already knows where he's been. Daniel shifted, his jaw tightening. "Emma, don't do this." She stood slowly, not to argue, but to meet him eye to eye. Her pregnant belly was visible now, rounding softly beneath her robe, a quiet, powerful reminder of everything she carried alone. "Don't do what?" she asked. "Don't hold you accountable. Don't bring up the woman you're clearly seeing in public while I wait at home with your child growing inside me." "It's not what it looks like," he said too quickly, running a hand through his hair again. Emma let out the smallest laugh, bitter and tired. "You were photographed, Daniel. Leaving a hotel. With Vanessa Langford. At midnight. What part of that isn't what it looks like?" He walked toward her, arms slightly outstretched, as if his presence alone could mend what was broken. "Look, it was a mistake. She's nothing. I was stressed. I've been under pressure with the expansion. I didn't mean for it to go this far." "And yet it did," she replied calmly. "It went far enough for the whole world to know before your wife did." Daniel's frustration began to rise. "I made a mistake, Emma. But you can't just throw it all away. We've built too much." Her gaze hardened. "We built this, yes. But I've been the only one trying to hold it together for years. You left this marriage long before you left our home tonight. I still love you," he insisted, his voice lower now, desperate. "You're the mother of my child." Emma stepped back, placing her hand gently on her stomach. "And that child will never have to beg for love like I did. I won't raise them in a house where loyalty is optional." She slid the folder across the counter toward him. "These have been sitting here for 2 weeks. I was waiting for a sign that the man I married was still somewhere inside you." Daniel didn't touch the folder. He couldn't. The silence between them thickened, colder than the January wind outside. Emma finally spoke again, voice steady, eyes clear. "I loved you more than you ever deserved." And then, without drama or tears, she turned and walked down the hallway toward her bedroom, leaving Daniel alone in the place they once called home, now just a beautifully decorated graveyard of everything he had destroyed. The next morning, sunlight pierced through the tall windows of the penthouse, but there was no warmth in the air. Daniel sat at the kitchen island where the folder still rested, unopened. His head ached from a night of little sleep and heavy regret, but it wasn't guilt that truly gnawed at him, it was uncertainty. He thought Emma was bluffing, acting out of anger. She had always been calm, always forgave. This felt different, but Daniel clung to denial like a shield. That was, until she re-entered the room, not as a heartbroken wife, but as a woman with a plan. Emma wore a fitted black dress that hugged her pregnant belly elegantly, her hair neatly pulled back, her face calm and unreadable. She carried no tears, no hesitation, only quiet determination. She didn't sit. She placed another folder next to the divorce papers, this one thinner, more dangerous. Daniel eyed it warily. "I thought we should talk before I go," she said. Daniel crossed his arms, trying to find footing in the conversation. Go where? She ignored the question and opened the second folder. Inside was a set of legal documents, stamped and signed, bearing the unmistakable watermark of Hastings Enterprises. She pushed it toward him. You signed this 8 years ago, remember? It was our first year in business. I was handling legal operations while you focused on mergers. You told me, and I quote, I trust you with everything. So you transferred 49% of the company shares to my name. Daniel's jaw tensed. That was symbolic. You never intended to. I did, she interrupted softly. And now it's legally binding. My attorney filed the documents with the board yesterday. As of this morning, I am the second largest shareholder. Only 1% away from full control. He blinked, stunned. The numbers ran through his head, frantic and jumbled. The company's balance, its voting rights, the upcoming acquisition deal, everything could tip with a whisper from her. You wouldn't, he said, but the words felt hollow even to him. Emma gave him a look that silenced the room. Daniel, you've treated me like a placeholder in your life for too long. I was your wife, your partner, and now I'm the mother of your child. And while you were chasing validation in the arms of a model with red lips and hollow ambition, I was making sure that if this day ever came, I wouldn't walk away empty-handed. He stood, stepping toward her, panic creeping into his voice. Emma, don't blow this up. Think about the company, your name is still tied to it. She picked up her suitcase and her keys without looking back. Exactly. That's why I'm walking away now, while I still have dignity in 49% of the empire we built together. Daniel didn't follow her. He couldn't. The sound of the door closing behind her echoed louder than any argument they'd ever had. And in that instant, he realized the brutal truth. The woman he took for granted now had the power to either preserve or destroy the world he thought he controlled. And he'd handed it to her, signature by signature. The cottage sat on the edge of a quiet inlet in Cape Cod, tucked between windswept dunes and whispering pines, its whitewashed porch overlooking a sea that never stopped moving, just like Emma's thoughts. She arrived in the sleepy coastal town 3 weeks after walking out of the penthouse, her suitcase heavier with resolve than clothes. The air smelled of salt and sand, and the silence here wasn't empty, it was calming, healing. For the first time in months, she could breathe without hearing the echo of Daniel's lies or the rustle of divorce papers. The ocean offered no judgment, only rhythm. The cottage was small and old, with creaky floors and windows that fogged on rainy mornings, but Emma loved it instantly. She chose it because it was nothing like Manhattan. Here, she woke to the sound of gulls instead of traffic. Her phone rarely buzzed. Her days were slower, softer. She spent mornings sipping herbal tea on the porch, her hand resting protectively over her growing belly, and nights reading baby books while wrapped in a knit blanket that smelled like lavender. The town welcomed her in that warm, small-town way, quiet curiosity followed by genuine kindness. The bakery owner, Mrs. Callahan, insisted she try the blueberry scones every Thursday. The local library gave her a card before she even had a local address. And then there was Jack Morgan. Emma met Jack on her second visit to the beach near the cove. She had been walking slowly along the shore, her feet sinking into the cool sand, when her balance shifted awkwardly. A steady hand caught her elbow before she could fall. Careful, he said, his voice deep and gentle. She looked up to see a man in his mid-30s, ruggedly handsome with sun-kissed skin, sea-glass eyes, and the kind of calm that only comes from living close to nature. Jack was a marine biologist who ran a small research center nearby. He had lost his wife 3 years ago in a boating accident and had since poured his life into preserving the local coastal ecosystem. There was a quiet strength in him, the kind that asked for nothing but gave without question. Emma didn't trust easily anymore, but Jack didn't push. He simply showed up, with fresh fish when the grocery delivery was late, with rain boots when storms rolled in, with stories about whales and tide patterns when silence became too loud. Their friendship grew organically. He never asked about her past unless she offered. When she did finally tell him about Daniel, about the betrayals and the divorce, Jack didn't react with shock or pity. He simply nodded, understanding pain in a way only those who've carried it can. Emma found herself laughing again, first at his terrible jokes, then at the absurdity of the life she'd left behind. She started painting in the mornings, walking more, and humming lullabies to her unborn daughter. She blossomed in the slowness. Her cheeks grew rounder, her eyes brighter. Locals began to comment on how peaceful she looked. Jack noticed, too, but said nothing, only smiled when she smiled. There were no expectations between them, only comfort. For the first time in a long time, Emma wasn't just surviving. She was living. And as the waves rolled in and the wind whispered through the reeds, she knew something deeply, profoundly true: peace wasn't found in luxury, or loyalty pledged with rings. It was here, in the quiet grace of choosing herself. Daniel Hastings sat alone in his office at Hastings Enterprises, once the beating heart of his empire, now a tomb of silence and echoes. The city skyline stretched endlessly beyond the glass walls, but it didn't impress him anymore. He had stared at it for years, chasing power, feeding his ego with acquisitions and press headlines. But now, even the view felt hollow. The scandal had spread like wildfire. The headlines didn't stop after the hotel photos, they only multiplied. CEO cheats on pregnant wife, Hastings stock plummets, the Vanessa effect, business or bed? And with every article, another client walked away. At first, he thought the damage was manageable. He told himself it would pass. But Emma's name had always added credibility to the firm. She had been the quiet legal genius behind its foundation. Now, with her gone and 49% in her hands, investors started to panic. Rumors swirled of a hostile takeover. Their flagship tech deal collapsed. A major partner pulled out, citing reputational risk. Internally, employees whispered in corners, and his board grew cold in meetings. The company he'd built was cracking from the inside out, and Daniel knew it was his fault. Vanessa, meanwhile, was basking in the spotlight. At first, she had played the role of the supportive partner, clinging to his arm at fundraisers, pretending to be misunderstood. But it didn't take long for her mask to slip. She leaked their photos to the press to stay relevant, gave suggestive interviews about her complicated love life, and demanded he endorse her luxury skincare line with company funds. When he refused, she lashed out, accusing him of using her, threatening to release private conversations and more photos. She became a liability overnight, a fire he couldn't control. One night, weeks after Emma left, Daniel found himself sitting in the dim glow of his office, holding his phone and staring at her name in his contacts. He had hovered over that number so many times, thumb trembling, never quite brave enough to call. But this time, he did. It rang twice. Then went to voicemail. He didn't leave a message. What could he even say? "I'm sorry I broke everything." It wasn't enough. It would never be. His mind drifted to flashbacks, their first boardroom deal, the time they danced barefoot in their kitchen after landing their biggest client, the tears Emma shed after their second miscarriage while he held her and promised to do better. He had lied, not just to her but to himself. He thought he could have both, Emma's stability and Vanessa's thrill. But in the end, he lost them both. And now, he was drowning in a life of his own making. Daniel leaned back in his chair, looking up at the ceiling. For the first time, he didn't feel powerful. He felt empty. Because in losing Emma, he hadn't just lost his wife. He had lost the one person who believed in him when he was nothing. And that was something no press release or money could ever fix. The storm rolled in faster than the forecasts had warned, thick clouds swallowing the Cape Cod sky, thunder rumbling over the waves like distant drums. Rain slammed against the windows of Emma's cottage, wind howling as if echoing the turmoil that had suddenly erupted in her body. She had felt the first sharp cramp around midnight, brushing it off as nothing more than nerves and pressure from the weather. But by 2 a.m., she was doubled over in the living room, clutching the armrest of the couch, sweat breaking across her forehead. Her water broke minutes later. The roads were flooded, phone lines down. Emma's hands trembled as she tried dialing emergency services, but the signal flickered and died. Lightning flashed outside, illuminating the cottage in a blue-white hue. She groaned, panic setting in, until she heard a knock, then the door swinging open. Jack stood there, rain-soaked and breathless, hair plastered to his forehead. He had seen the lights flickering from the shore and sensed something was wrong. Without a word, Jack sprang into action. He laid blankets on the floor, boiled water, and calmed her through each contraction with a quiet strength that steadied her heartbeat. Emma had never felt more vulnerable or more brave. Between screams and gasps, she clutched his hand like a lifeline, her body straining with every wave of pain. Jack whispered encouragements, never letting go, guiding her breathing, anchoring her in the storm. And then, just as the wind outside reached a furious crescendo, the cry of new life echoed through the tiny cottage. Emma sobbed, not from pain, but from overwhelming relief and joy, as Jack gently placed the tiny, squirming baby girl into her arms. Her skin was warm, her lungs strong, her fists curled tightly as if already ready to fight for her place in the world. Emma looked down at her daughter through tear-filled eyes and whispered the name she had chosen months ago but kept to herself. "Hope," she breathed. "Hope Isabella Hastings." Jack smiled beside her, quietly wiping his hands and letting the moment wrap around them. Hope was more than a name. She was a beginning. A promise. A symbol of survival, born from brokenness, delivered into peace. As the storm began to fade into a gentle drizzle outside, Emma held her daughter against her chest and felt the strength of two hearts beating as one. For the first time in a long time, she wasn't afraid of tomorrow. Daniel sat alone in the study of his penthouse, the room dim except for the flickering light of the fire casting shadows across the walls. His desk, once cluttered with contracts and acquisition deals, now held only a single sheet of thick, cream-colored paper. A fountain pen rested beside it, uncapped, ink slightly smudged on the page where he had paused too long. The words came slowly, weighed down by the gravity of what he had lost. He had rewritten the first sentence at least 10 times, each draft more hollow than the last. In the end, he simply wrote what was true. "Emma, I don't expect forgiveness. I wouldn't know what to do with it if you gave it. But I need you to know. I was a fool. I let greed and pride make a stranger out of the man you once loved. You gave me everything, your trust, your loyalty, your love, and I repaid you with silence, betrayal, and absence. I didn't just lose you. I lost myself. And now I wake up in a home that's silent for all the wrong reasons." The letter trailed off there, unfinished. He stared at the page for a long time, then folded it carefully and tucked it into a drawer he rarely opened. He couldn't send it. He didn't deserve the grace that might follow. That letter was not for Emma. It was for the man he used to be, before he ruined everything. Later that evening, as he scrolled mindlessly through social media, his thumb stopped on a post shared by a former colleague. It was a group photo taken at a small community fundraiser in Cape Cod. Most of it was unremarkable, smiling faces, picnic tables, string lights, but in the corner, captured almost as an afterthought, was Emma. She was holding a newborn baby, wrapped in a soft pink blanket. Her eyes were bright, her hair loose in the ocean breeze, and the child looked up at her as if the world began and ended with her smile. Daniel's breath caught in his throat. His daughter. He hadn't known if the baby had arrived. He hadn't been told anything. And now here she was, real, alive, a piece of him out in the world, loved by a woman he had betrayed beyond words. He sat down heavily on the leather couch, burying his face in his hands, the crackle of the fire the only sound in the room. "I didn't deserve either of you," he whispered into the silence. 1 year had passed since Emma Hastings left the life she once knew behind, and in that time, she had transformed in ways even she hadn't imagined possible. The once isolated, betrayed woman had risen from the ashes of heartbreak to become a force of resilience and empowerment. She now led a thriving law firm named Reclaim Legal, a sanctuary and stronghold for women navigating the difficult, often painful process of divorce, especially those escaping abusive relationships or infidelity. The firm was staffed entirely by women, many of whom had stories similar to Emma's. Together, they fought for justice, dignity, and a new beginning for their clients, turning wounds into wisdom and pain into purpose. Emma's days began with the soft laughter of her daughter, Hope, whose bright eyes and boundless curiosity filled the cottage in Cape Cod with light. The mornings were gentle, no frantic rush, no looming deadlines or toxic boardroom battles. Jack Morgan, her steadfast friend and the quiet anchor in her life, brewed coffee as Emma prepared for the day ahead. Their relationship was one of profound healing rather than romance, a sanctuary where both could be vulnerable without fear of judgment or expectation. They shared dinners, long walks along the shore, and the unspoken understanding that some wounds take time to heal and that love could take many forms. Emma had learned to embrace the slow, steady rhythms of peace and strength. She no longer sought validation in a partner or through power plays. Her worth was self-defined, rooted in the fierce love she held for her daughter and the unwavering commitment to her own well-being. The scars Daniel left behind had not disappeared, but they no longer defined her. Instead, they fueled her passion to help others reclaim their lives and dignity. One crisp autumn afternoon, as golden leaves drifted lazily outside her office window, Emma sat at her desk, sorting through mail. Among the usual bills and client correspondence, an envelope caught her attention, elegant, cream-colored, and unfamiliar. She hesitated, fingers brushing the flap before carefully breaking the seal. Inside was a letter, written in Daniel's familiar handwriting. Her heart tightened, a complex mix of emotions swirling within her, curiosity, anger, sorrow, and something like cautious hope. She read the letter slowly, Daniel's words confessing regrets, acknowledging mistakes, and offering an apology that felt both sincere and overdue. He spoke of watching her from afar, admiring the strength she had cultivated, and expressing a wish for peace between them. Emma folded the letter deliberately, a small, almost imperceptible smile touching her lips. She wasn't the same woman who had trembled in the penthouse all those months ago. She was stronger now, rooted, empowered, and ready for whatever came next. With Hope's laughter echoing from the next room and Jack's steady presence nearby, Emma knew this was only the beginning of a new chapter, one where she wrote her own story, on her own terms. The late afternoon sun filtered softly through the towering oaks of Central Park, casting long shadows over the quiet bench where Emma had agreed to meet Daniel. The air held a gentle chill, hinting at the approaching fall, but the park was still alive with the laughter of children and the rhythmic tapping of joggers on winding paths. Emma arrived first, her steps steady and calm, her hands folded lightly in her lap as she waited. She wore a simple coat, the kind that whispered of resilience rather than luxury. When Daniel approached, his usual confident stride faltered just slightly, a rare vulnerability settling over his features. He paused a few feet away, searching her face as if seeking permission to speak, and she nodded, silently inviting him to sit. His voice was soft, earnest, stripped of the arrogance that had once defined him. "Emma, I want to start by saying I'm sorry. Not the kind of empty words you've heard before, but a real apology, from the bottom of my heart. I was blind, selfish, and I hurt you in ways I didn't even realize until it was too late." He swallowed hard, eyes flickering with regret. "I don't expect you to forgive me, but I needed to tell you that." Emma listened quietly, not because she was moved by his words, but because she needed this moment, not for his sake, but for hers. She needed to hear the apology spoken aloud, to place it in the past and reclaim her own peace. When he finished, she exhaled slowly, the tension in her shoulders easing. "Thank you," she said simply, her voice steady. "That means more than you know." There was a pause, heavy with unspoken memories, before Daniel hesitated. "May I meet her? Our daughter? When you're ready." Emma's eyes softened as she glanced down at the small silver locket resting against her chest, a gift she had kept hidden from the world. "In time," she replied gently. "When the moment is right." He nodded, understanding the weight of those words. For once, Daniel was patient, willing to wait for the bridge to be rebuilt rather than demanding it be rebuilt overnight. As he stood to leave, Emma felt a calm settle over her, a quiet strength that had taken months to nurture, born from heartbreak and healing alike. She watched him walk away along the winding path, his figure growing smaller, blending into the tapestry of the park. Then, with a deep breath, she lifted her gaze to the sky above. The clouds were light and scattered, tinged with the soft glow of sunset, as if the heavens themselves were offering a new beginning. And in that moment, Emma whispered to herself, a declaration more than a thought, I didn't lose myself. I finally found me.